would you say people shouldn't be discouraged basically if they have to go first through a phase of trial and errors, whether they do it in their front porch with worms in a bin or in their backyard? There's a learning curve there.
Yeah, no, and I think that's why walk before you run, right? Which is why I started with worms, right? It's something I kept in my basement, right? Like I didn't even need to go outside. It can be kept indoors. It can be kept underneath your sink. Like it is pretty odorless. Very easy to manage. Like in fact, like the worms do all the work for you. You just stir it around a little bit. But like through that process, you understand like what is the timeline here? What are the things that like how long will it take to see something fully decompose? And well, vermicomposting and composting are totally different processes, or like distinct processes, I should say. Um, the I think they're instructive to like be stepping stones to learn about the decomposition process generally. Um, yeah, and then you can level up and get a 3-bin system or a 1-bin system in your backyard. I think the other sort of like travesty is that like most of these like composting kits, for lack of a better term, that are like sold, are I don't personally I think they're mostly gimmicks. Like a compost tumbler that is off the ground in a plastic sealed container will not make good compost. Period. Uh, right? The I love the solid waste district. We work very closely with them, but they sell this like it's like a rectangular prism that like you put on the ground. It has no bottom, and apparently you're just supposed to like put food scraps in it, and it, so it just it doesn't work that way, right? And so um, so yeah, so we always encourage that like the best way to make a compost pile is by having compost on the soil, right? You think about like making a sourdough or something like that, like you get the natural indigenous microorganisms from your ground to help start the process. The idea of like having it off the ground, floating above the soil is like very counterintuitive. Um, and then these bins that are like totally sealed prevent for oxygen from getting in there. So of course it's going to smell and it's not going to decompose properly, or it's going to take way longer than you want it to.
All right. I'm totally fascinated and learning so much. I'm completely in awe of you and your knowledge. And this is excellent. And I'm the generation that grew up without recycling bins, and I recycle but I don't compost. Now tremendous guilt. So, question. I have a very big backyard. I actually have a bocce ball court in my backyard that's overgrown, and I don't know what to do with it, so I can make it a composting bin, I think. Here's the thing. So I'm getting educated here, being completely enlightened and feeling horribly guilty for throwing out so much food. And I know for a fact that there's a cabbage in my refrigerator that needs to be thrown out. Well, what do I do? Do I leave it? I mean, like, all right, tell me.
I bet turn it into sauerkraut.
Well, okay, I could do that, but it's really old. Like, how long will a cabbage last, right? So I do have to throw out some food scraps. I have the yard to do it. What would be my very first step to begin to compost? Just throw it in my bocce ball court? I mean, and also there's deer and there's
I mean, I think
hawks and
I mean, there's a lot of schools of thought, right? I think that like if I were you, I would probably watch a couple YouTube videos. I would probably read a book on composting. We can share some literature with you. I like to sort of have the instructions together before I like start failing. But I mean, I think that like if you wanted to start composting in your backyard, the very first thing I think that people widely underestimate is the amount of carbon they need. So the fall is actually a really, really good time to start composting. it'll get more challenging in February, but but you know, like your leaves right now, you're likely raking and putting on your tree lawn, and then someone else gets to compost them, right? That's a resource that you can use to stay right on your yard. And then as you generate food scraps, you know, add them to a pile. Like say you're using a 5-gallon bucket, fill your 5-gallon bucket up with food scraps over the course of the week, empty that into your bin, and add 3 buckets full of leaves or wood chips. By doing that, you have your carbon to nitrogen ratios. You then want to make sure that your pile isn't too wet. Like if it's been raining on it a ton, you might put a tarp over it. If it's the middle of July and we haven't had rain, you might want to water it. The consistency of the inside of a compost pile should be like a wrung out sponge, which is a really specific kind of moisture. The other sort of helpful tip is like surface area. The more surface area you can create, the better. So in using the cabbage as an example, right? Like the cabbage will break down a lot faster if you cut it up, right, into smaller pieces, because the more surface area that is available for the microbes to latch onto, the faster it'll break down. In terms of preventing things like deer and squirrels, chicken wire goes a long way in keeping things out, but you also don't want to keep yourself out, right? So the thing I remind people of is that like composting is not a passive process. It's like a Tamagotchi or something that needs to be fed and monitored and looked after. If you let it just sit around, you're likely going to run into some odors or some pests. And so it should be interacted with at least once a week, is what I would say.
But you're not just going out and throwing stuff in your backyard in a pile. You're putting
you want like some sort of corral. Yeah. So so you like the ultimate like DIY move is like get 3 pallets and make like a corral of some sort, right? So there's 2 sides and a back. So the front is totally open, and that's where you might like put some chicken wire. So prepare it by putting a bunch of leaves on the ground in the middle of that square. And then you add your food scraps to it, and you're mixing it with a pitchfork whenever you're adding material, which should be at least once a week. Another thing that you will want is a thermometer, like a long thermometer. The solid waste district sells these, but basically if your pile is not heating up, that's your pile's way of talking to you and saying, we need to do something different here. I don't have enough of this, or I have too much of that. And you know, so it's a very sensory kind of practice, right? If it smells, you don't have enough carbon. If it's not heating up, you might have too much carbon. If it's, you know, too wet, it's going to smell putrid. If it's too dry, you know, nothing's going to happen. And so, yeah, it's very textural. It's a very sensory kind of practice.
And just to jump off on Dr. Weissman's concern, as a person for doesn't know but is now interested, a question I think that a lot of people would have is like, okay, you want to start composting, you want to be part of the solution, but you're not about to also start having a garden, can't, or that's too big of an undertaking for now. What should people do then if they want to start composting, but they don't have they're not growing food and have a need themselves for the compost?
Yeah, I mean, it is admittedly a self-serving answer, but like you should use our service. So we have and like I will talk more about why, right? So we have a community-based drop-off program. We have 8 locations. We'll have 11 before the end of the year that are community-based locations across Northeast Ohio where people can pay a monthly membership to drop off all their food scraps. It alleviates you of the need to like learn how to make or manage a compost pile. It also allows you to divert all of your household food scraps. And then if you want it, you can get the soil that we make at the end of the process at a discount.
That is so much better for me.
Yeah, right. And then we also have a home pickup service, right? You know, convenient. We live in an era of convenience. We provide residents with a 5-gallon bucket lined with a compostable bag, and then once a week, like the milkman of yesteryear, you put it out on your front steps, and then we exchange your full bin for a clean empty bin. Again, you get discounts on our soil and other products. And so I think the reason I don't feel totally shameless saying that is because this is a utility that like other cities have, right? And I think that our residents deserve, right? And so we don't get to the point of like having a contract with Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, with the city of Solon, the city of Lakewood, unless their residents can see, use, and like demand services like ours. And so we really need to see a greater level of adoption of our services to be taken seriously by these elected officials, right? Like we can demonstrably show to any community that we work within that we're saving them money. So like our clients are underwriting the cost savings to the municipality, and it should be the other way around, right? Like we would love to see municipalities say, nope, all of our residents will utilize this service because we're contracting with Rust Belt Riders, rather than, you know, blame shifting this to say, oh, residents, we invite you to check out Rust Belt Riders and then reap the benefits, right? So we want to see municipalities have skin in the game, but they only get to that by public demand and saturation of use of services.